Ryan, move this way? Oh, you have to set it over here, right? Yeah, okay. All right. All right. Hello, welcome to Ratio Christi. This is week 10. How many of you were expecting there to be like 1 to 4 inches of snow outside? Anybody? Because that really fizzled out. They said, I thought today was supposed to be a big snow day, and there's literally nothing on the ground. But so if you live stream people, you have no excuse for not being here. There is no snow on the ground. So, but we'll keep the live stream going for you anyway. So, like I said, welcome to Ratio Christi. As you know, because you're here, we meet here every Wednesday night for this semester. As you probably also know, we have an email list, so sign up for that. Talk to Wesley. He sends out a great email with resources, what we're doing for the week, what the topic's going to be, other fun and interesting things you might want to know. That's all on Wesley's email, but then also there's social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, things like that. So today is the day before Halloween, so it's kind of like, All Hallows Eve, I think is where that comes from. All Hallows Eve, the Eve of All Hallows Eve, something like that. And you might not look like it, but I am wearing a Halloween costume. If you can't tell by the color of my shirt, it's kind of this maroon red. I'm dressed as a Hoosiers fan. I wanted to know what it felt like to have a decent football team. Sorry. Yeah. Anyway, so we do have this thing we've been trying all semester. Some of us get together to have a meal before Ratio Christi. I mean, meet at some restaurant in the vicinity downtown, order food, eat together, talk about different things, and then walk over together. Tonight we were at Qdoba, so basically knock off Chipotle. Chipotle is actually a real word. It describes some type of like pepper or something like that, but Qdoba is literally a fake word. But we ate at Qdoba. Next week we'll be at Panda Express, so 6 o'clock next week, Panda Express. Meet us there. Food fellowship right before Ratio Christi. So also, as I mentioned every week, Wesley is doing tabling at UNL. So join Wesley and others like Zach and sometimes Matt, and I've been there once in a while. Others I know have too. I think Grace has been tabling with us too. So if you want to join us for tabling, we talk to people walking by. We usually have a question. The question over there was, how do you explain the resurrection story? And we get responses on that. It's kind of a way to engage people in different conversations about the topics we're actually studying. And that is our topic tonight. How do you explain the resurrection story? What is the evidence? And so that will be our topic for tonight. An interesting thing of note that we just found out about next semester, what we'll be doing, we'll be bringing something to campus, and I'm going to let Ben talk a little more about what that will be.
Yeah, so I've been working with Ratio Christi National. We actually have an opportunity through RC to get a hold of a couple Torah scrolls. They're somewhere in the range of 300 to 500 years old. So next semester, end of February, same week as Frank Turek, we'll be bringing those to Lincoln, having them on display at various events. So you could just be looking forward to that. I think one of the scrolls is like 93 feet long. So we're hoping to have a huge table that we can roll out of that. You'll be able to look at the scroll. I don't think touching is allowed. I don't know. I need to follow up on that. But you'll be able to look at the scroll, magnifying glasses, and there will be some translations of the Hebrew and other information on how the scrolls are actually written and transmitted throughout history, and then comparing them to our current day Bibles, the translations that we have. So just something to keep aware of. Even as we get more information out to you guys, you can be sharing it with your people at your churches or other friends that you have. This is an opportunity to see a historical artifact that's, like I said, hundreds of years old, and be able to evaluate that. So just want to let you know that was something we got super excited about. I'm super excited about showing those here in a couple weeks or a couple months out. So just thought we'd give you a heads up on that.
Thank you. So I just thought once we found out today that that was going to happen and we had the details secured for that we let you know, so you can look forward to that next semester. So I guess that is mostly what I have. If you're a UNL student and want to become a member of Ratio Christi, talk to me, and we can look into doing that for kind of an official administrative membership where you go on UNL's roster and then you get to vote in different things that we do. And I think that's the last point I had to make. So without further ado, beyond that, we will introduce Adam Johnson. You all know him. He's our chapter director, and he'll be doing the talk tonight, as usual. I'm trying to think of something creative to say, but I can't. So, Adam Johnson.
Well, I'm super excited about those scrolls. Once upon a time, I could read Hebrew. I went to seminary to be a pastor and worked on my seminary degree. It took me 6 years and took quite a bit of Hebrew. But it's like one of those things, like any language, if you don't use it on a regular basis, it just drifts slowly from your mind. So maybe I'll have to brush up on my Hebrew before the scrolls get here. I'm super excited about that. Well, log in for us on Facebook if you haven't done that already. You'd like to utilize social media to get the word out about what we're doing. We can only serve people if they're aware of us. And our burden is to be servants to people at UNL, students, professors, staff. So help us. Use Facebook, use other social media to get the word out about what we're doing. We meet here at University Church. If you're looking for a church, maybe you're new to Lincoln, I always like to give a plug for University Church. Technically, it's a Southern Baptist church, but it's run very much like a non-denominational church. They don't make a big deal about their denomination. So they meet right here, 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings. Very close, very easy access to campus, just a couple blocks away. So I encourage you to check them out. Well, here's our theme for the semester. All semester, we're making the case that Jesus is God. We're kind of doing a 3-semester program, if you will. I don't like that term, but we started last spring building a case for Christianity by making arguments that there is a God. So imagine, if you will, you have atheists on this side and then all the theists on this side. And all the theists would include Christians, Muslims, Jewish individuals, so on and so forth, Plato, Aristotle, a lot of different types of theists. And so that was kind of the two groups. And we, with a bunch of other theists, were presenting arguments to believe that there is a God, a supreme being. But as Christians, now, if you can imagine, we're in this group with different theists, and now we're explaining how we are unique among theists, or maybe how we disagree with other theists. Because even within theism, people have different views of what this supreme being is like. And for us as Christians, we're making the case that's unique to our theistic belief system, that Jesus is this supreme being. So all semester, we're making the case that Jesus is God. And then, as Ben mentioned, next semester, the theme is going to be the Bible. Why do we believe as Christians that the Bible is from God? And so the scrolls coming in February is going to fit in really well with our theme next semester. So our theme is going to be the Bible. We're looking sometimes at the New Testament this semester, but we're not claiming it's from God. We're not claiming anything spiritual about the Bible. We're merely evaluating the New Testament as ancient historical documents, which obviously they are. But next semester is when we're going to make the case, build the case, that the Bible is from God, is a message from God, more of a theological argument. Whereas this semester we're just looking at it historically. Well, to build our case that Jesus is God, as I said at the beginning of the semester, we're focusing in on two separate approaches, or two different arguments to believe that Jesus is God. Here's the first one that we just finished covering last week. You might still have at your table an outline if you haven't been here the last few weeks. If you'd like to follow along with an outline or have a hard copy in front of you, because we're going to zip through this really quick. We actually spent probably close to 2 months, I would say, building this argument to believe that Jesus is God. And I'm not going to go through all the steps. We've done that several times. But we've completed this argument. We spent the last 3 weeks giving 6 reasons. There's more, but we just looked at 6 reasons to believe that the New Testament authors told the truth when they gave us their eyewitness testimony of Jesus' miracles. So that was kind of the crux of this argument, was Jesus' miracles. That provides credibility, or it authenticates his claim to be God. Well, tonight we're going to move on then to our second argument. And it's not going to take nearly as long as the first one did. In fact, we're going to be able to, if things go well, we're going to be able to cover it all in just one night. And you'll see that's one of the key differences between the first argument and the second one that we're going to look at tonight, is the length of it. So in other words, sometimes I refer to this argument as the umbrella approach, right? Think with me for just a second, the umbrella approach. In this approach, what we're doing, if you follow along the outline, what we're doing is we're building a case that the New Testament is historically accurate. Okay, we've got these 27 books and letters in the New Testament, and we're building a case in this argument, an umbrella case, that all of it is historically reliable, right? And then anything that the New Testament says is historically reliable or trustworthy, right? So you build this umbrella, the New Testament's historically reliable, and then anything under the umbrella is trustworthy or safe, right? So think of it as an umbrella approach. The new argument, the one that we're going to look at tonight, sometimes I refer to it as the bullet approach. So you got the umbrella approach, and now think of this one as a bullet, like almost like a sniper, zooming in and just hitting a target 100 meters away, let's say. So with this argument, we're just going after one thing. We're not building an umbrella approach. We're not going to try to build the historical reliability of the New Testament. We're just going to focus on one specific thing. And that one thing is Jesus' resurrection. So we're going to say that the argument goes, if Jesus rose from the dead, that is great evidence that he is God. So similar in this sense, right? A miracle confirms his claim. In this approach, we're just focusing on the miraculous resurrection of Jesus Christ. And we're saying that that event, if he really did rise from the dead, that confirms his claim to be God, right? So it's a bullet approach. And we know that there's a sense in which Christianity itself rises or falls based on Jesus' resurrection. I mean, Paul even said in 1 Corinthians 15 that if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, our faith is worthless. It's Paul's words. If Jesus did not rise from the dead, we are still in our sins. Our relationship with God is still broken. We don't have a Savior who mediates for us. Our faith that we put in him as our mediator is worthless faith, if he didn't rise from the dead. So there's a sense in which not only Jesus' divinity hangs on the resurrection, but our entire Christian faith, I think, rises or falls on the resurrection. Now, with the umbrella approach, I think the reason why some lean towards this bullet approach is because the umbrella approach can easily get sidetracked, right? And it's happened with us a few times over the last couple months, right? We get sidetracked with issues like, who wrote the book of Hebrews, right? If we're trying to establish the historical reliability of the entire New Testament, all 27 books, we can get sidetracked with some of these issues. Did Peter really write 2 Peter? When was the Gospel of John written? With the bullet approach, all we're focusing on is Jesus' resurrection. So there's a sense in which, with this approach, all of those side issues are kind of missing the main point. They're getting caught up in details that might be irrelevant to the main issue. The main issue being, did Jesus rise from the dead or not? So it's kind of like this. Think of this historic event we've all had to read about growing up in America. In our history books, and our grade school teachers told us how Washington crossed the Delaware River, right, in our War of Independence with England. It's a huge historic event in our nation's history. Now, historians have some disagreements about this crossing. It's a historic event in our nation's history, but historians disagree on exactly where he crossed the river and exactly when he crossed the river. So some of those details, we can get sidetracked with, and it's important sometimes to talk about those. But the key issue is, he did cross the river. The main point is that he did cross the river. And all historians agree on that, even though they disagree on some of the minor details. Similarly, with the resurrection, there might be some things we don't quite know for sure. Even some accounts might not be as historically reliable as others. But we can make a very strong case, I believe, that Jesus did rise from the dead. And if we don't let ourselves get caught up in the minor details to distract us from the main point, we can focus in on the very compelling, powerful evidence for just this singular event, Jesus' resurrection. So I'm going to turn over to you guys now. If you're new to Ratio Christi, what we like to do every 10-15 minutes, usually, is just get me to stop talking and to allow you guys to discuss something at your table for a few minutes. So now that you've been exposed to both of these type of arguments, I want you to discuss the strengths and weaknesses of this approach, and do so in the context of comparing it and contrasting it with the first approach, right? So what are the strengths and weaknesses of this bullet approach that I just explained to you? So I'll let you guys talk about that at your table for a few minutes here.
this or not. You know? So it's less about, well,
Okay.
this, and this. I have a problem with this. So then
Here's some advantages of this approach. Somebody doesn't think that the Gospel of John is accurate? Fine, throw it out. We don't need it for this argument. Somebody thinks that Jesus didn't say a lot of the words that the New Testament claims he did? Fine, just throw those things out. We don't need that for this argument. Somebody doesn't know, somebody claims that 5 or 6 of the books in the New Testament were actually pseudepigrapha, fakes, written by somebody else and who we think wrote it. Fine, just throw them out. We don't need those ancillary details for this argument. The power, really, of this approach is that we don't have to establish the historical reliability of the New Testament first. We can just focus in on the main event, so to speak. Focus in on the resurrection. Sometimes this approach is referred to as the minimal facts argument, and you'll see why in a moment. But look at this from Dr. Gary Habermas. He explains that a case for the resurrection can be built by using only those minimal facts that are clearly established by the historical method. So some of those other things maybe we don't have as much historical evidence for, that's fine. Just for the sake of this argument, throw them out. We don't need them. So if you just stay, and we'll go over what these facts are, but if you just stay with these facts that are established and agreed upon by virtually all scholars, you can utilize those facts alone to build a very strong case for Jesus' resurrection. And then these facts can also be used to refute alternate hypotheses. So sometimes people will say, well, maybe it wasn't Jesus who died on the cross. Maybe somebody else died in his place, Judas. Well, these facts, as we go through them, you'll see how they can be used to dispel a lot of these alternate theories, trying to explain these facts away. So these minimal facts, what are these minimal facts? Well, we're only going to use facts that pass these 2 tests. Okay? These 10 facts we're going to look at tonight have to be extremely well evidenced. And they have to be agreed upon by all scholars, even skeptical scholars. So we're talking Christian scholars, conservative Christian scholars, liberal Christian scholars, atheist scholars, virtually all scholars that their scholarly work is focused on the New Testament. So we're going to only use facts that all New Testament scholars agree to. This argument does use the New Testament. Okay? I don't want you to be mistaken here. There are some portions of the New Testament that this argument uses, but only those verses that even critical scholars agree are genuine. Does that make sense? So as we've talked a lot about this semester, of the 27 books of the New Testament, there's 6 to 7 of Paul's letters that are just so well evidenced through historical sources and archaeology that everybody accepts that they were authored by the Apostle Paul. He wrote 13 letters in the New Testament, according to conservative Christianity. But there's 6 to 7 of them which are just very well, much more evidenced than the others. The ones I'm referring to are Romans, 1st, 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, 1 Thessalonians, and Philemon. These are just so well evidenced that even critical scholars will affirm them. They really liked these 6 to 7 letters because Paul was scholarly himself. He had a lot of education. And he was in a position to know the truth or the falseness of what he was writing about. Because he claims, remember, to be an eyewitness of the resurrected Christ. So Paul here is claiming to be an eyewitness. So like we mentioned last week, he is in a position to know if what he's saying is true or false. He's claiming to be an eyewitness. And if he's lying, he knows it, because he's claiming to be an eyewitness. Another thing that critical scholars like about Paul is that he is a convert. He was one who became a Christian after the events, after the main ministry of Jesus. Paul became a convert. And so critical scholars find his letters to have much more credibility for that reason, that he was converted to this belief system. So let me start us off. I'm going to share with you a video from William Lane Craig's ministry, Reasonable Faith, because I think it does a really good job setting up this minimal facts argument. So take a look at this video here.
Why was Jesus of Nazareth crucified? Because he made outrageous claims about himself. He claimed to be the one and only Son of God. Why would anyone take his claim seriously? Well, that all depends. If Jesus actually rose from the dead, then his claim to be God's unique Son carries considerable weight. On the other hand, if the resurrection never actually happened, then Jesus may be safely dismissed as just another interesting but tragic historical figure. Did Jesus rise from the dead? As we explore this question, we need to address 2 further questions. What are the facts that require explanation? And which explanation best accounts for these facts? There are 3 main facts that need to be explained. The discovery of Jesus' empty tomb, the appearances of Jesus alive after his death, and the disciples' belief that Jesus rose from the dead. Let's examine each of these. Fact number 1. The discovery that Jesus' tomb was empty is reported in no less than 6 independent sources. And some of these are among the earliest materials to be found in the New Testament. This is important because when an event is recorded by 2 or more unconnected sources, historians' confidence that the event actually happened increases. And the earlier these sources are dated, the higher their confidence. Moreover, the Gospels indicate that it was women who first discovered that Jesus' body was missing. This is likely historical because in that culture, a woman's testimony was considered next to worthless. A later legend or fabrication would have had men make this discovery. Our confidence in the empty tomb is further increased by the response of the Jewish authorities. When they heard the report that the tomb was found empty, they said that Jesus' followers had stolen his body, thereby admitting that Jesus' tomb was, in fact, empty. Most scholars, by far, hold firmly to the reliability of the biblical statements about the empty tomb. Fact number 2. The appearances of Jesus alive after his death. In one of the earliest letters in the New Testament, Paul provides a list of witnesses to Jesus' resurrection appearances. He appeared to Peter, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Finally, he appeared also to me. Furthermore, various resurrection appearances of Jesus are independently confirmed by the Gospel accounts. On the basis of Paul's testimony alone, virtually all historical scholars agree that various individuals and groups experienced appearances of Jesus alive after his death. It may be taken as historically certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus
Now, he's an
appeared to them
atheist.
as the risen Christ. Fact number 3, the disciples' belief in the resurrection. After Jesus' crucifixion, his followers were devastated, demoralized, and hiding in fear for their lives. As Jews, they had no concept of a Messiah who would be executed by his enemies, much less come back to life. The only resurrection Jews believed in was a universal event on Judgment Day after the end of the world, not an individual event within history. Moreover, in Jewish law, Jesus' crucifixion as a criminal meant that he was literally under God's curse. Yet somehow, despite all of this, the disciples suddenly and sincerely came to believe that God had raised Jesus from the dead. They were so completely convinced that, when threatened with death, not one of them recanted. Even the Pharisee Paul, who persecuted Christians, suddenly became a Christian himself, as did Jesus' skeptical younger brother, James. Some sort of powerful, transformative experience is required to generate the sort of movement earliest Christianity was. That is why, as an historian, I cannot explain the rise of early Christianity unless Jesus rose again, leaving an empty tomb behind him. These 3 firmly established facts cry out for an adequate explanation. How do you make sense of them? Down through history, various naturalistic explanations have been offered to explain away these facts. The conspiracy hypothesis, the apparent death hypothesis, the hallucination hypothesis, and so on. All of these have been nearly universally rejected by contemporary scholarship. The simple fact is that there is just no plausible naturalistic explanation of these 3 facts. The explanation given by the original eyewitnesses is that God raised Jesus from the dead. If it's even possible that God exists, then that explanation can't be ruled out. For a God who is able to create the entire universe, the odd resurrection would be child's play. An empty tomb, Jesus' appearances alive after his death, and a group of dejected followers suddenly transformed by a radical new belief in a risen Messiah. These are independently established historical facts. How do you explain them?
So I think this video does a great job setting up the minimal facts approach, but if you noticed, he only provided 3 of these facts. And tonight we're going to look at 10 of them, okay? So Craig does a good job here. Really, the person who's most well known for this approach is a guy by the name of Gary Habermas. Maybe you've heard of him before, and I'm going to pass around one of his books. But he's got several books out there that make the case for Jesus' resurrection through this approach, using the historical method, and I think they're very powerful. So Chris, I'm going to hand this to you if you want to send it around, let everybody take a look at it. That book he co-authored with Michael Licona, who we brought to UNL to speak 2 years ago now. It's hard to believe. A little background on Gary Habermas. He had a lot of doubts about Christianity as a younger man. He traveled the world. I had a class with him in seminary. He talked about how he studied all religions, almost became a Buddhist, but had always been fascinated with Jesus' resurrection. So he wanted to just hone in on that and study that historically. When he went to Michigan State University to get his PhD, he told his advisor that this is what he wanted to do in his PhD, was study and look at the historical evidence for Jesus' resurrection. And they were very leery at first. They said, well, this can't be a theological argument. It has to be based solely on historical evidence. And he said, that's exactly what I want to do. I just want to study the historical evidence, first of all, for myself. And so he got his PhD doing this, and ever since he's been well known for making this argument. Of course, he was very compelled by all the evidence for Jesus' resurrection. And now he's been at Liberty University for over 30 years. So he's got a list, this has been really his life's work. He's got a list of 3,000 to 4,000 scholars who have written, make sure I get the numbers right, over the last 50 years. So 3,000 to 4,000 New Testament scholars, he's got it all documented, that work in English, German, and French. From all sorts of backgrounds. Jewish backgrounds, atheist backgrounds, liberal Christian, evangelical Christian, doesn't matter. These are 3,000 to 4,000 New Testament scholars, and he's got good records of all this. And these 3,000 to 4,000 scholars all agree on these 10 facts that I'm going to put up on the board now. Okay, so 10 facts, and Gary Habermas is very well known for making this argument. You can read about it in that book or others, but I just want to go through with you now these minimal facts then. 10 minimal facts that are accepted by virtually all scholars. Okay? So the first one. Virtually everybody agrees that Jesus died by crucifixion. I like the video because it gave some of the reasons why historians believe these things are true in history. But we're just going to list them. Okay. Second one, all New Testament scholars, historians agree that Jesus was buried. They all agree, these 3,000 to 4,000 New Testament scholars, that the disciples were initially in despair when Jesus died. Now, Gary Habermas has surveyed all the New Testament scholars writing, again, in those three languages, English, German, and French, over the last 50 years. And he's honest, about his findings. This one, the fourth fact, is only agreed upon by about 3/4 of scholars. So still fairly good, still, the vast majority, but 25% would question this or have some questions about it. So the tomb being found empty is number 4. Number 5, all scholars agree that the disciples had experiences that they believed were appearances of the risen Jesus. Gerd Ludemann, in the video, an atheist New Testament scholar, he affirms this amongst the 3,000 to 4,000 others. But the key is here that, as an atheist, he doesn't think that they actually experienced the risen Jesus, but he agrees that the disciples thought that's what they were experiencing. So you see the difference? Everybody agrees that the disciples thought they were experiencing the risen Jesus. Number 6, we talked about this last week. Everybody agrees the disciples were transformed into very bold advocates for their Christian faith, so much so that they were willing to die for it. The resurrection, everybody agrees, the resurrection was preached very early in Jerusalem. We talked about that a few weeks ago, especially with the historical evidences from those early Christian creeds, to the point where Gerd Ludemann even says that the resurrection was being proclaimed within 2 years of the cross. So very early. Number 8, the day of worship was moved to Sunday. Why is that important? Well, first century Jewish culture, Saturday, the Sabbath, was a very important day for them, right? That was their day of worship, their day of rest, Saturday. And for these Jewish people, all the disciples and Jesus were all Jewish ethnicity, For them to move their day of worship from Saturday to Sunday was a huge ordeal. But everybody agrees that they did that. Why? Why would they do that? Why would they be willing to do that and suffer all the persecution and really ostracization that came from doing that? It'd be really something, just think of something really taboo in our culture. Number 9, Paul. Virtually all scholars agree that Paul was radically converted from an experience, again, that he believed was an appearance of the risen Jesus. Everybody agrees that this is what Paul believed. Obviously, if they're not, Christian scholars, they're going to say Paul was wrong in his belief, but yet they still affirm that Paul himself thought he saw the risen Jesus. And then the last one, the video kind of touched on this a bit too, the last of the minimal facts that Gary Habermas uses is that all scholars agree that James, Jesus' half-brother, skeptical half-brother, also became a Christian. So Gary Habermas does a great job if you ever heard him speak or watch his videos online or if you read his books, he lays out all of these facts and then he asks the question, what is the best explanation for these facts? These facts are agreed upon by everybody, so then what best explains these facts? In that sense, it's an abductive argument, right? Argument to the best explanation, which is a very common form of reasoning. So now that you've been exposed to the umbrella argument that we've done the last couple months, and now you've been exposed to this bullet approach, which one do you find more compelling? I'll give you guys a few minutes to chat about it at your table there. Go ahead. All right. Yeah, I find this argument so powerful, and I found it helpful in conversation just to keep the focus on the main thing. Keep the main thing the main thing. People often like to talk about the differences between the synoptic gospels, and does that make them trustworthy or not? And you can go down that rabbit trail so long, and that it seems like then you have to deal with this supposed contradiction or this seemingly contradiction. Whereas this, you can just throw all that out. You can just throw all that to the side and say, even if there are contradictions between the Gospels, it doesn't really matter. Did Jesus rise from the dead? And if Jesus rose from the dead, then that is a huge, that really establishes the truth of his deity and Christianity as a whole. So even if I can't explain, who the author of Hebrews is, or, this supposed contradiction between Matthew and Luke, it doesn't matter in this approach. In that sense, I find it very, very helpful. It keeps the focus on the main thing and doesn't get us in the weeds, so to speak, especially when you're having a conversation. And oftentimes, if you're lovingly trying to encourage somebody to trust in Christ, you don't have much time. I always say that evangelism, sharing your faith, encouraging people to trust in Christ, is always best done in the midst of an ongoing personal relationship. But even then, you have coffee for half an hour. You get together and play racquetball the next month. Oftentimes, you don't have 3 hours to sit down and build the umbrella approach. If they're willing to take a book or some resources, great. But with this approach, especially conversationally, you can keep the focus on the resurrection. They bring up other issues. You can say, I'm not sure if I have a good answer for that, but I know I do have these facts that I think provide a very strong case that Jesus rose from the dead. And if he rose from the dead, even though I can't answer some of these periphery things, he rose from the dead. What else do you need? That seems to be a very strong advantage of this approach. Well, the next step with this approach, it's been hinted at a little bit already in the video, but the next step with this approach is then to start evaluating the alternate theories. So I thought, we'd do something a little bit different tonight. I'm going to throw out alternate theories to you, and then you at the tables can discuss how these possibilities, these other theories, don't fit the facts. Does that make sense? As I've said before, it's so easy to come up with theories. I have so many conversations where people say, well, is it possible that this happened? Is it possible that they were hallucinating? Is it possible that Jesus was an alien from another planet and that's why he could do these things? And I always say yes. Of course it's possible. Virtually anything's possible. It's so easy to throw out possibilities, but we want more than just possibilities. We could be in the Matrix right now, right? That's possible. We could be in a simulation right now. All sorts of possibilities, but what we really want to know is what's most probable, right? That's how we base our decisions as human beings. What does the evidence point to? Not what's possible, but what does the evidence point to? In other words, it's easy to speculate, but give me the evidence for your possibility. Give me the evidence for your theory. So I'm going to throw out theories to you, and then I'll let you at the table discuss how you think that these various theories don't mesh up with the facts. Does that make sense? So in other words, I'm going to give you an alternate theory. Judas died on the cross instead of Jesus. And then you at the table, look at the facts. I'll put the facts back up on the screen. You at the table discuss how that theory just doesn't fit the facts. That Judas died instead of Jesus. Which facts would disprove that alternate theory? Does that make sense? All right, I think you guys got it. We'll try one. All right, so I'm going to give you a little bit of time at your table to discuss the the hallucination theory. The theory that these folks, the disciples, hallucinated. When they thought they saw the risen Jesus, it was actually a hallucination. That's an alternate theory that's out there. So go ahead, discuss at your tables what facts could be used here to refute that theory. Go ahead, begin. About 10 more seconds, we're going to move on to the next theory. Now, you can go through this very systematically, right? And if you read Gary Habermas's book, this is what he does. But just go through it systematically. Take this theory, the hallucination theory. Does it fit with fact number 1? Well, yeah, fits with that fact. Does it fit with fact number 2? Jesus was buried. Yeah, that wouldn't disprove the hallucination theory. The disciples were initially in despair. Fits that. Fact number 4, though. The tomb was found empty. That seems to refute or be a good refutation of the hallucination theory, right? It doesn't seem to fit that fact. And then you just go on systematically through fact by fact and think about, does this fit that theory or not? And then there's other things you can evaluate about the theory. I heard some of you talk about, and Gary Habermas does this as well, talks about how hallucinations work, right? Hallucinations aren't, there's no such thing as group hallucinations. Hallucinations are things that individuals experience, right? So on and so forth. You can attack the theory in different ways, but really we're just evaluating it in light of these 10 minimal facts. All right, the next theory for you to discuss is the wrong tomb theory. The wrong tomb theory. And what this theory says is basically the women and the disciples, they went to the wrong tomb. So when they found it empty, it wasn't Jesus' tomb that was empty. It was actually a different tomb that hadn't been used yet. That's why it was empty. Right? So I'll give you a couple minutes and discuss that theory. What facts would refute that theory? Ready, set, go. All right, the next theory to evaluate is referred to as the swoon theory. The swoon theory. And according to this theory, Jesus didn't actually die on the cross. He just fainted or passed out. Okay? So the people who claimed that he died, they were just mistaken, let's say. And then a couple days later, he came back to consciousness and left the tomb. So the swoon theory, he didn't actually die. So go ahead, evaluate that theory in light of these 10 facts. Ready, set, go. All right, 3 more theories we want to evaluate tonight. The next one is the substitution theory. And according to this theory, I think I mentioned this one earlier, it wasn't Jesus that died on the cross, it was some substitute. Judas, I think is what the Quran says. Maybe maybe a lookalike Jesus that they slipped up there at the last moment, right? So how would these facts refute that theory, the substitute theory? Ready, set, go. The next theory to consider is the very first alternate theory that was ever proposed. Anybody know who that or what that was? And who proposed it? This is what the Jewish authorities proposed. The disciples stole the body. The stolen body theory. So Jesus didn't really rise from the dead. The disciples just in the middle of the night snuck in there and stole his corpse. They stole the body. And see, that explains all this stuff. All right, evaluate the stolen body theory. Ready, set, go. All right, the last theory we're going to evaluate tonight and compare to the evidence is referred to as the pagan myth theory. So maybe you've heard this before, but some people will claim that this whole resurrection narrative was just copied from pagan myths, right? The disciples, whoever made up this legend, were actually just copying pagan myths, right? Myths of people dying and rising again. That whole narrative was just copied from pagan religions and borrowed or stolen, really, the idea. And then this false narrative was created from those. So how would you evaluate that theory in light of these 10 facts? Ready, set, go. Now, for me, I think this was one of the most desperate attempts to explain away Jesus' resurrection. I mean, it just seems to me as a philosopher, I'm not a historian, most of my professional training has been in philosophy, but my immediate problem with this is that it's a false dichotomy. I mean, let's say, for the sake of argument, if I could get everybody's attention back up here, let's finish the lecture and then you guys can discuss more at the tables. But for the sake of argument, let's say there is some myth that's almost, not verbatim, but fairly close of this narrative. Even if that was the case, then it's not. It seems a false dichotomy to say that even if there would be some sort of a pagan myth out there like that this also couldn't have historically happened. You know, why think both can't be true? That's what I'm saying, it's a false dichotomy. So this one to me seems like the most desperate attempt, especially when we have these solid 10 historical facts. But you can go further down this path if you'd like, and we could spend a whole night evaluating these pagan myths. But I just find them to be such a desperate attempt, and really besides the point. So I want to show you one more video. This is kind of a sequel, if you will, kind of a part 2 from Reasonable Faith's first video on the resurrection, minimal facts. And then Dr. Craig's video here I'm going to show you next kind of walks through some of these alternate theories as well. So yeah, these pagan myths, that as a theory just does not hold up for several reasons. All right, here you go.
It's a matter of historical record that Jesus of Nazareth died and his body was placed in a tomb. It's also been firmly established that after his death and burial, his tomb was found empty. Various individuals and groups saw appearances of Jesus alive, and his disciples somehow became absolutely convinced that Jesus had risen from the dead. These are the historical facts. How do you explain them? Down through history, various naturalistic explanations have been offered to explain away these facts. Let's examine the 4 most popular ones. First, the conspiracy theory. According to this view, the disciples faked the resurrection. They stole Jesus' body from the tomb and then lied about seeing Jesus alive, thereby perpetrating the greatest hoax of all time. However, this theory faces overwhelming objections. It's hopelessly anachronistic. It looks at the disciples' situation through the rearview mirror of Christian history, instead of from the standpoint of a first-century Jew. Jews had no concept of a Messiah who would be defeated and executed by Israel's enemies, much less rise from the dead. In Jewish thinking, the resurrection of the dead was a general event that takes place only after the end of the world and has no connection at all with the Messiah. The conspiracy theory also fails to address the disciples' obvious sincerity. People don't willingly die for something they know is not true. An honest reading of the New Testament makes it clear. These people sincerely believed the message they proclaimed and were willing to die for. For these and other reasons, no scholar defends the conspiracy theory today. A second attempt to explain the facts is the apparent death theory. Jesus didn't really die. He revived in the tomb, somehow escaped, and managed to convince his disciples he was risen from the dead. This theory also faces insurmountable obstacles. First, it's medically impossible. The Roman executioners were professionals. They knew what they were doing and made sure their victims were dead before taken down. Moreover, Jesus was tortured so extensively that even if he was taken down alive, he would have died in the sealed tomb. Second, this theory is wildly implausible. Seeing a half-dead man who crawled out of the tomb, desperately in need of bandaging and medical attention, would hardly have convinced the disciples that he was gloriously risen from the dead. As a result, no New Testament historians defend this theory today. A third explanation is the displaced body theory. Perhaps Joseph of Arimathea placed Jesus' body in his tomb temporarily because it was convenient. But later, he moved the corpse to a criminal's common graveyard. So, when the disciples visited the first tomb and found it empty, they concluded that Jesus must have risen from the dead. Once again, this theory cannot make sense of the facts. Jewish laws prohibited moving a corpse after it was interred, except to the family tomb. What's more, the criminal's graveyard was located close to the place of execution, so that burial there would not have been a problem. Also, once the disciples began to proclaim Jesus' resurrection, Joseph would have corrected their mistake. So, once again, no current scholars endorse this theory. Finally, the hallucination theory. The disciples didn't really see Jesus, but just imagined that he appeared before them. They were all hallucinating. This theory also faces considerable problems. First, Jesus appeared not just one time, but many times. Not just in one place, but in different places. Not just to one person, but to different persons. Not just to individuals, but to groups of people. And not just to believers, but to unbelievers as well.
That's huge.
There is nothing in the psychological casebooks on hallucinations comparable to these resurrection appearances. Second, hallucinations of Jesus would have led the disciples to believe at most that Jesus had been transported to heaven, not risen from the dead, in contradiction to their Jewish beliefs. Moreover, in the ancient world, visions of the deceased were not evidence that the person was alive, but evidence that he was dead and had moved on to the afterworld. Finally, this theory doesn't even attempt to explain the empty tomb. Thus, the four most popular naturalistic theories fail to explain the historical facts. Where does that leave us? Another possibility is the explanation given by the original eyewitnesses that God raised Jesus from the dead. Unlike the other theories, this makes perfect sense of the empty tomb, the appearances of Jesus alive, and the disciples' willingness to die for their belief. But is this explanation plausible? After all, it requires a miracle, a supernatural act of God. Think about it. If it's even possible that God exists, then miracles are possible, and this explanation cannot be ruled out. And surely it's possible that God exists. So how do you explain the resurrection?
You know, it's been said, and I tend to agree, that if the resurrection of Jesus wasn't a supernatural event, if it was just like George Washington crossing the Delaware River, if it was just, a naturalistic event, it wouldn't even be questioned. The vast evidence for this resurrection of Jesus is literally overwhelming. So really the only hang-up is the fact that it was miraculous, that it was supernatural. But remember, we started the semester by saying that philosophical bias can't be brought to the table if, as the video says very well, it's even possible that God exists. That's why we first, in this 3-semester program, spent the entire spring semester making a case that there is a God. Because if there is a God, we have to at least be open to the possibility of miracles. And then when you have so much compelling evidence that a particular actual miracle took place, I think that hugely compels us to believe that Jesus, in fact, is God. It doesn't seem to me that it can be refuted on historical grounds, that you have to jump almost philosophically and make an argument against the possibility of miracles to reject Jesus' resurrection. Well, here's some ways you can get involved with Ratio Christi. Of course, sign up for that weekly email that we send out to let folks know what we're up to, big events that are coming up. You can check with Wesley or sign up back there on that table to get that weekly email. And let me give you an update as to what we're doing over the next few weeks. So we've wrapped up now the 2 arguments for Jesus as God. Next week we're going to have just a general Q&A. Right? We were not able to get Dr. Bashford to come and speak this semester. He said that he'll be able to come in the spring. So we're putting off his lecture till next semester. So we're going to do this filler week, just a general Q&A. Be thinking of questions you may have in relation to these topics, other things. Just going to have a general Q&A for the whole night. Me and Ben and Wesley will be up here to try to help with any questions we can help with. So that's coming up next week.
And just so you can be aware, we're working on hopefully having a platform that we will be able to text in questions and upvote the questions that you want us to answer. So that'll be something we can do in real time. We'll hopefully, I think the idea is to try to have that on the screen. You can see what questions are being asked, and we can do that way. So if you're scared of having mic or something, you can just text in your question.
And this is a good way to invite people too. You know, just tell them that there's going to be a Q&A. Maybe you've talked to folks who have questions about Christianity. You know, tell them a little about what we do and what we are as Ratio Christi, and invite them to come and ask their questions and challenge us. We're open to that as long as we can do it, you know, lovingly and respectfully. We're here to try to serve and give good reasons and evidence for why we think Christianity is true. And then after that, Ben's going to give a lecture on the topic of abortion, pro-life argument. And then I'm going to be back and I'll summarize. It's a summary, but there's also some new stuff in it. It's a lecture that I give if I only have, you know, the opportunity to give one lecture on whether Jesus is God or not, why I think Jesus is God. So we're going to summarize a little bit of what we've done, but we're also going to look at some new material that night. This is 3 weeks from today. And for example, some of the new material, we're going to look at fulfilled prophecy. So some of the Old Testament prophecies that Jesus fulfilled. So making a cumulative case for Jesus' divinity. Then I think we're going to wrap up the semester. We've got a movie night coming up after all that, and then maybe even a Christmas party in December, as long as we don't run into any snow dates. I thought we were going to have a snow day today, based on the news last night, but that was quite unimpressive in terms of snow today. So no fear of a snow day for tonight. Well, what questions do you have for this evening? In response to this topic, we always try to end the night with at least a few minutes. It's getting pretty late, but let's take a couple minutes and do any questions tonight. And then you guys are free to, you know, as I always say, stay at your tables, discuss. We try to stay around till 10 plus sometimes.
If Jesus did in fact rise from the dead in the flesh, why did he only stay around for a few years?
Yeah, that's a good question. Why did Jesus only stay around for a few years? My mind first goes to some of the things he said in the New Testament, some of the reasons he gave for leaving. I remember him saying things like he was going to come and then send the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit was going to have a ministry among us. I think that was some of the reasons that he gave. But ultimately, I don't know if we have all the answers to that question. Anybody else have any suggestions or thoughts or verses of the New Testament or things that Jesus said as to his reasoning?
I have one. If that's all right. So the least attested fact of the 10 facts is the tomb was found empty. And that's the 75% one. That's why it's the only one with a number on it. So everybody else is higher than 75%, presumably. That's just a quick...
Yeah, according to Habermas, all the rest of them are 100%.
Whoa. Okay. So I have a question. When I think of the empty tomb, I'm wondering, what do the other scholars say happened? Do they just hold to one of those wrong tomb theories or something like that?
Oh, my understanding is that they might not have an alternate explanation. They just don't find the evidence compelling that the tomb was found empty. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's like, take the George Washington crossing the Delaware River. Let's say a historian says, look, I don't have an alternate explanation as to where George Washington was that day or why he didn't cross. It's just that, when all we have are some of these little tidbits about him crossing the Delaware River, and, these tidbits for whatever reason aren't very trustworthy. So I'm not 100% convinced he did cross the Delaware River. It's more like that. It's not that they have an alternative explanation, they just don't find the evidence for it itself compelling. Does that make sense? Yeah. That's my understanding of why some reject it or aren't convinced by it. All right, well, as I always say, you guys are free to stay around and chat. These 3, 4, 5 minute conversation times we give you guys are just supposed to be the beginning of the conversation. So eat up the rest of the food so Wesley doesn't have to take it home. And thanks for coming tonight, guys. I appreciate it.